Hey there, what's happening? Anthony Taylor here. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. It is July 9th. I'm testing out a new introduction because I really wanted to just connect with you, the listener of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. First of all, say what's up, and I appreciate you, and that I really hope you enjoy today's episode. Today, I get to chat with Brent Kedzierski, who spent over 20 years at Shell, yes, that Shell, in learning strategy, people development. So we kind of have a nerdy conversation about what it takes to build a leadership pipeline, the really important parts of building systems like that, and then the difference between what it takes as a big business and a small business. I really hope you enjoy it. I hope that you are enjoying the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. If this is your first time here, or if you've listened for a while, be sure to subscribe. We'd love to look at any comments that you have, just to know who we can keep interviewing, and if you're liking what we're putting out. And then so that you know, our podcast is put on by SME Strategy. I'm the CEO at SME Strategy, and we facilitate strategic planning offsites. If you or your team is considering doing a strategy offsite, we are now booking into kind of October, November area. So if you're interested in that, reach out. And then finally, we're launching a management training program, which is perfect for this episode. We're launching a management training program also in the fall. So if you're interested in getting your team trained on management techniques, tools, etc., and you don't want to develop your own leadership development program, be sure to reach out to us and we can put your team or individuals on your team in the beta. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Brent Kedzierski, talk about the future and the present state of talent and people development. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you very soon. Bye. Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My guest today, Brent Kedzierski, and hopefully I got that one right. He is the Chief Industrial Advocate. He's really focused on human-centered industry, which I'm excited to bring to you today. And he brings over 25 years of experience from Shell, being their former head of learning strategy and innovation. Brent just strikes me as a curious guy. I'm really excited for this conversation about people-focused learning. Brent, what's happening today?
Hey, Anthony, good to see you and good to be on the show with you. Good day. I think, when we talk, what I want to talk about is all this time at Shell and prior to Shell, always dealt in the people business, behavioral science, research on what made good leaders, what made good decision makers. I remember earlier on in my early career, right out of college, we did a lot of research on understanding in the military what was the decision patterns and differences between generals and captains. And we were looking for things like that. So I always started my career in a lot of this kind of behavioral based research into what made good leaders, what made good decisions, what made good problem solvers, troubleshooters, and analysts. So interested to talk to you about some of these things, talk to you about the anatomy of work, what's good, what's bad, talk to you about human behavior at work, and just talk to you a little bit about what makes a good experience for a human being at work.
Sweet. I love that. So, as I look back, I was, when you were explaining that, like how it works and how it came to be, I couldn't help but think an organization like Shell being well-oiled, no pun intended, pun intended,
Right.
and saying, hey, we're so good at our operations that it allows us to have a better impact and better structure for supporting our people. A lot of the work that we do in SMEs is small to medium enterprises, where they're kind of still cobbling together what they do and how they do it. And so their energy is split between being able to build a business and being able to support the people within the business. Now, that's just my assertion being on the outside. How do you see the difference between potentially large organizations and small organizations in terms of how they develop and support people? Have you found commonalities across all things? What is your kind of state of the union, so to speak, as you see people thinking about leadership and supporting human beings in their work?
Super. Yeah, it's all about how you grow your timber. Okay. So what is your leadership pool? What's your pipeline to build leaders? And how do you culturally define what a good leader is and what a bad leader is? And how do you kind of hold people accountable for those kind of behaviors. When you talk about a big enterprise like Shell, global, multinational, you're talking about a myriad of cultures. You're talking about all kinds of things, and you're trying, and you got scalability, because you can put in multi-million-dollar leadership programs. You partner with universities like Harvard or Wharton, you can kind of reach out to the best, leadership minds in the world and kind of build those. And again, when we were at Shell, or I was at Shell, we had those kind of big, high dollar, high end leadership programs where you could, go up the leadership ladder, and depending on what kind or level of leader you were, there was a different, protocol or program for you. Now, obviously, smaller companies don't have those deep pockets and can't, have that kind of strategy, but it doesn't mean they can't have great programs, you know. And I think that, one of the things that I saw is, it's the culturally, and this is one of the things I have against leadership in companies today, is the current model is if you're a good technical person, you're a good well engineer, you're a good, geologist, what they do is they make you a leader. And, because you have the credibility, blah, blah, blah. But oftentimes, especially in like engineering companies, the engineering mind isn't always the best leadership mind or the framework. So we have this problem in society today where we make good technical people leaders. And that's really not the DNA that, the best leaders are comprised of. So I always have this issue right now in society say, shouldn't we be taking, because of the Gen Zers coming into the workforce and the changing expectations about work post-pandemic, should we really be saying we need different types of leaders? We need to build a different pool of leaders. Maybe we need to have 4-year degrees that are nothing but building leaderships, people that have the aptitude, the affinity to be leaders, and then they're classically trained rather than just, kind of hobbyists to get into leadership because they want to progress in the organization. And leadership's the only way in most companies to progress. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, so a couple things that I took away. So one, the importance of having a good program to support that structure, and like systemically with a good program would support getting the right people in as long as you had the right definitions. Going back to working with engineers in a people space, they think in absolutes. And as you and I know, that people are far from absolute, the shades of gray very deeply. And then sometimes it actually hurts the individual being put in a leadership space because that's not what they want to do. And so it doesn't help the individual and it doesn't help the team. And so I'm curious from that perspective, what would a good program look like so that you can support the right people and then build the right upward mobility so that people can be successful, not just because they're leaders, but maybe even upward mobility in an individual role.
Right. I mean, because if you look at the Gen Zers today, again, the traditional gold standard in I guess life is, you go to high school, you get into the best possible university you can get into, you get your 4-year degree, you leave the university with a huge student loan debt, and you start to climb the corporate ladder. The Gen Zers today don't really necessarily, they'll trade going to Harvard or Princeton or Yale to go to a lesser school, get a scholarship maybe, and leave the university without debt.
Hmm.
And the next thing is they're saying, I don't necessarily need to climb the corporate ladder. I don't need that cookie cutter mold where you go into a company, and every company kind of has the DNA that says, well, you got to punch your ticket. You got to go do this role, then this role. You got to work here. You got to work there. And they kind of clone people to say, this is what we had as far as our executives. And so we want to mirror their path. And so everybody's going to kind of do that same path. Well, the Gen Zers today, they don't want that. They say, I don't want to, live to work. I want to work to enable me to live and live better. They want a purpose. They want a livable wage so they can do things, but they don't want to be strapped to their companies where, they're disenfranchising their life because they're being a dedicated worker as far as what the baby boomers thought was a dedicated worker.
Mm.
And it's changing that landscape. So they want to have we used to have work-life balance, which just meant you weren't working 24/7. Well, they want to have work-life balance where work doesn't define them. How they live their life and what they do pretty much outside of their work is defining them. Their work is just an enhancement to their personality, their archetype.
Yeah, what I find interesting is the dichotomy between, folks wanting purpose, but also wanting a good salary because life is expensive. And that old path of, hey, you were with an organization, in your case, 25 years, some folks 10, 15, 20. That doesn't happen because kind of the best practice is to hop between jobs, be there 2, 3, 4 years, because the mobility that you'll get both from salary and title will support you. So there's kind of a balance that, all folks, but let's say younger folks, have to experience between finding purpose and, like, do you stick within that, and then also being able to have the right salary so that you can afford to do that. And then I look at that. So that's from the employee perspective. And then I think about it from the employer perspective, who wants to develop these great leadership programs, but you're also recognizing that you might have your best employee stay with you for 5, 6 years. So how do you balance the desire to support folks, but also balancing, hey, they might not be here for very long. So do we overinvest? Do we underinvest? How do you see that balance striking? And then what kind of guidance would you recommend for our listeners as
So
employers?
I was just doing a show on the construction industry, and they're pouring in a lot of money on skilling, upskilling, reskilling, but they're having significant turnover issues and retention issues. And honestly, most of the companies that I work with today, they're all having recruitment or attraction issues. They're all having tenure issues. Some of the tenures today are less than 2 years, and the turnover rates are it's like 60% for some industries, especially manufacturing. And so they can't get people in and get them, time to autonomy or time to competence, and then they leave. So they get maybe 6 months out of them, and then they've got to retool them. And a lot of this is because of these poor onboarding programs. The statistic I think is with a poor onboarding program, an employee is likely 66% likely to leave within 6 months after the poor onboarding.
Hmm.
So we've got this new talent pool coming in, and they've got these changing expectations. They want robust, profound, purposeful work, but they're really focused on their well-being. I mean, the Gen Zers are really open about their mental health. I mean, most of when I'm in circles with them, they'll all talk about their psychologist and what they're talking about and this and that, and they're very open to that, and they want those, and they want, they don't want the 30-year career that we had at Shell and things like that. They don't want that. They're trading that longevity for employability and kind of color. And as far as they don't want to sit and be a control room operator for 10 years. They want to learn all kinds of things, and this continual reskilling and upskilling and growth and learner mindset. They have that much more than the folks like when I grew up. So I mean, there's a lot of characteristics around these up and comers that are going to really comprise, I think, 25% or more of the workforce by 2030. And then so really by 2030, you're going to have millennials and Gen Zers in the workforce, and the baby boomers and the Gen Xers are going to be moving out.
So, what I hear, and you didn't necessarily say this, but what I like, what I am left with, which I am a leader, and I'm saying, okay, what do I need to do? So maybe as an employer, manage my expectations and kind of expect a revolving door, but then adapt my hiring and onboarding process and not build it for somebody to stay with me for 10, 15, 20 years, but maybe build it in an attractive kind of way so that I know that people are going to come in 5 years out. That means I need to have more of a pipeline for my people. And I also maybe need to have a clearer value proposition as an employer so that when people come in for their 5 year stint, they know exactly what they're going to get. They know they and we, so employer, employee, have clear expectations as here's what you want, here's what I want. I know you're here for a good time, not a long time. And how do we make it that it's a mutually beneficial relationship? Would you say that that's the case from where you sit?
Oh, definitely. I mean, look at this. If you take a look, and I always use this rule, every generation grows up, so I grew up in the, 80s and or so, in the 70s. And I was formed and shaped by society and everything that was going on around me, just like the baby boomers were, and just like the Gen Zers. And what happens is you get shaped by how you grew up. And then when you get to a point in a company where you have the ability to shape and mold the workplace, that's how it goes. So, for example, the Gen Zers are really tech savvy. They grew up as digital natives, so they want a place that embraces automation. You can't go to a bunch of Gen Zers, get them in an onboarding program, sit them in a conference room for 2 weeks and give them 3-ring binders to read, which quite honestly is what most companies are doing today. It turns them off immediately. They grew up in a world with instant access to information, and now you give them in a company where they can't find any information, and it makes them crazy. So, and they grew up with an entrepreneurial streak. They grew up watching Shark Tank, and so they've got this thing. They grew up with this whole idea around social responsibility and purpose. So when they buy something, they shop at thrift stores now because they want to save the planet and they want to recycle, have a circular economy. So, they buy their beer because it supports a cause. They buy their shoes because it supports a cause, or their socks. And they really grew up in a much more diverse time. So they're really more into collaboration and diversity, and and quite honestly, they're really good because of the social media. It's challenging the status quo. So they're comfortable questioning things and expressing themselves online, because they've done all this social media stuff. But now here's the thing though. So we're getting in this world of work, and leaders that listen to this, I mean, they'll know this. Companies today, they have a real problem with psychological safety of people. So now all those things I just told you about, those characteristics of those Gen Zers, well, now you go to companies and you got to start with like inclusion safety. So, everybody on the team feels that they belong, they're valuable, they're comfortable being themselves, they have their own identity without fear of exclusion. Now, you couldn't do that. I remember when the first guy I saw in London, he came into work with a ponytail and an earring and blue jeans. That was a real shocker back in the 90s, right? Or the 2000s. But then you got to have this learner safety where the work environment actually is encouraging you to have this growth and development, this sense of curiosity, to feel safe asking questions, try new things, make mistakes, admit your mistakes, as part of your generalized learning process. Then you've got to go up and have to be a contributor safety. So they feel empowered. They can say their ideas. They can put it against the wall. They don't fear being, ridiculed or embarrassed for their suggestions. And the best one is this challenger safety. This is most advanced stage where they feel confident in voicing, dissent or challenging the status quo or disagreeing with superiors. I mean, you ask most, Xers, if they felt safe in the workplace doing that, and you're going to say no. But the Gen Zers, they demand this. I remember at Shell, we had a bunch of young geologists in an auditorium, and they were vocally standing up, disagreeing with the VP that was out there talking about the new strategy, and they were challenging it right there in open forum. And most of the gray beards and things, they couldn't believe that was happening. So I don't think leaders and companies are recognizing that the future is upon us today, and they need to really adapt to it a bit better than they have been.
Yeah, I couldn't I can agree more. So folks, if you follow our podcast for a while, and if you don't, please subscribe. But there was a podcast we interviewed Timothy R. Clark, who wrote the 4 stages of psychological safety. I'm so big on that. So Brent, I'm really glad that you brought that up. And then just kind of building on the last point is, folks, I don't think generally are looking long term to their human strategy, because you talked a lot about Gen Z. Well, those are the folks that are coming in the workforce, baby boomers and whatever other generations behind. They're not the ones that are going to be filling the, call it, bottom of your talent pipeline. So instead of thinking, what was your talent pool 5-10 years ago, I invite you to think 5-10 years in the future. There's folks who aren't even in university yet. There's probably folks not even in high school yet that are going to be part of your future workforce. And so adapting your training to their expectations, are you giving them 100-page ring binder, or are you making things digitally with videos? Are you, providing that, work contribution, life contribution, and making sure that your onboarding and all the processes are meeting up their expectations? And then ultimately it's like, what is the value proposition of your employer brand? So those are all the things I'm taking away from you, Brent. Just as we finish up here, any last piece of advice you want to give to our listeners as they look at really making, human-centered industry and supporting the folks that work for them and with them? And then also, where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so there's two things. I mean, there's leaders have to understand the human experience cycle at work. People go into a task, they ready themselves, they prepare themselves, and they go and they have some kind of expectations that they preformed about doing that task. Then they get into that task. And then what happens, there's what's called an anatomy of work. So, and right now, the anatomy of work in corporations is still really bad. This is why a lot of people advocate you can even have a 4-hour workday, because people are only really productive about 4 hours a day. They're interrupted every 7 minutes. The decisions are poor. They don't get supported well. There's unnecessary meetings. There's unproductive meetings. They're still looking for information that they can't find. They're wasting a lot of time. And really, they say that the majority of work time is spent talking about doing the work that you're going to do and not actually doing the work. Mm-hmm. So if you think about these Gen Zers and the people that are coming up, they're not going to have the tolerance for, this shoddy design of work. And we shouldn't have shoddy work design anymore because of all the technology and, all the information that we have. So, that's the one thing. So they get in there, they have this bad experience, then they go and they reflect on it. And, companies aren't capturing that as well as they should be. So, most workers will go to the water cooler or they'll talk offline and they'll just complain about it. I'm a big advocate. I don't like these annual employee surveys in companies because, they're one time, they might be butted up against a reorganization or a bad share price report or something like that. I believe in this idea where because we have the analytics today and the tools, every employee should have an app on their phone or something. And, periodically, they're given a request to answer 5 questions about their work. Were you able to collaborate effectively today? Were decisions made effectively and timely? Maybe ask them 4 or 5 questions, but it kind of goes periodic, and they get $2, and the $2 goes right in their account or something, every time they do it. And that way the company's getting robust daily feedback from a, serious sample size of the organization. That's what we need to do, because then what happens is people debrief their work, and then they make their opinions, perceptions, attitudes about the company, about the leaders, about the work, and then they go back into that work cycle again. So you can either have a repetitious where you keep degrading and disengaging the workers because of the work experience, or the work experience becomes better where instead of going downhill, it's going uphill, where they're learning, they're growing, they're collaborating. And that's the thing today that most people aren't getting on board yet. Because of automation, there's 3 power skills that are coming up to companies. They're the cognitive skills, because there's more data, matrixed organizations versus hierarchical silos. So there's more to think about, and there's more to make sense out of. And then they have to be more collaborative because they're dealing and able to deal with a lot of other entities and organizations and units and shifts and all kinds of, people with it.
So go ahead, Brent. We got disconnected for a second there. Just want to kind of back it up to where you were. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah. So when we talk about this anatomy of work, and work experience is the new currency within organizations. This whole idea of the human being the center of work and trying to design work in a more humanistic approach. So with this anatomy of work, you either have a good experience that builds engagement, builds purpose, builds meaning, or you have a poor anatomy of work that, disenfranchises the employee, it disengages the employee, and basically, it leads to all the negative effects of people and turnover and attrition and, things like that. So that's what I would say is the big things is, look, we got to be leaders and we got to be cognizant in designing the anatomy of work that's very human centric and it builds people up rather than breaks them down.
I love that. I think one of the key things taking away from that is, we talked about, the hiring process, the recruiting process, the transfer process, purpose, salary, but really like that's all operational, and taking it from, 30,000 feet and looking at the total anatomy of work, and for all leaders, HR or otherwise, to reflect on, do you have a positive anatomy of work or a negative one? Brent, where can people learn more about you, what you talk about, and listen to some of your talks?
Well, I'm out there on the web a good bit, and obviously LinkedIn's a great source. I mean, that's a free, fast, and focused way to get a hold of me. So I'm happy to always connect. And I would leave you with this. I mean, I always think about this. Our lives are being much more put on the plate in terms of the limitation of life. We are only on this planet for so long, and I think people in societies recognizing that, after thousands and thousands of years of people dying, they're saying, hey, it's finite. I need to make some good use out of this time. And, the average person spends 100,000 hours at work. And just think if we can make many of those hours or a bigger percentage of those hours better for a person, what that's going to mean to not only people but their families, the communities, and generalized society. So that's what we're going to in this next phase of the future of work is how do we build that line that better jobs build better people, they build better families, they build better communities, and society gets to evolve.
I love that. Thank you, Brent. I appreciate it. One of the things I'm taking away today is, the higher purpose of work, which I believe is part of our strategic planning work. If people have good jobs, they have a better life, they have better community, and we can change the world. And then leaders listening, reflecting to say, hey, is your anatomy of work really providing a great life experience for the folks on your team? So, Brent, thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it, chat. It was a fun one, and wish you all the best moving forward.
Thanks, Anthony.
Folks, my guest today, Brent Kedzierski, who is the Chief Industrial Advocate at HumanWorks. Check him out online. We'll put the link to his LinkedIn there. And, just the goal of the podcast is support all leaders and managers in their work. And Brent is walking the walk. So I encourage you to reflect on your processes, reflect on your systems, and see how you can make folks' work life as good as it can be. So once again, my name is Anthony Taylor. This has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I appreciate you. If you did like today's episode, please share. Give us 5 stars or rate it on whatever service you use. That way we can get it out to more people globally, which would be awesome. I appreciate you. I'll see you next time.